For a long time, I've had a few rules when it comes to buying games. The main two are that I won't buy a game for more than $20, and the other is that I won't buy it until it's on sale, unless it's an indie title, which are usually pretty cheap already. A lot of this is because I don't like to spend a lot of money. I don't have a tremendous amount of it, and given that I also play drums and cymbals are pretty damn expensive, I'd rather not play $60+ for every game. I also don't like to buy games if I'm not going to play them. So waiting for a game's price to fall below that $20 mark forces me to play a lot of the games I already have on my pile of shame, out of which I've found a few gems over the years. Another part though is due to the fact that I feel very satisfied replaying those experiences I've already had. I've played the Half-Life series all the way through at least 8 times. I've genuinely lost count, and the Mass Effect trilogy 3 and a bit times through, racking up well over 100 hours in each game. I bring this and my stingy purchasing rules up because I think Mass Effect Andromeda will be the game that makes me cave. The game that will make me pay more than my wallet-friendly $20. Not because I'm so excited for it that I won't be able to help myself. Not because what has been shown of the game thus far has blown me away, but rather because if Andromeda can capture even a tenth of what the first game did, it will be absolutely worth it. When I first started up Mass Effect, I actually hated it. I was used to the wonderfully satisfying gunplay of the Half-Life series, and Mass Effect just couldn't compare. It was clunky, none of the weapons felt quite right, and the wandering scope plagued my first couple of hours of play, initially making me regret my choice to play as the Infiltrator class. There were multiple points where I nearly quit, but I persisted, if only at first to complain about the game to my friends who did like it. And then something changed. A lot of small things became more manageable. I began to get used to the wandering scope and the way the game signposted where to head. I stopped noticing how textures popped in and finally stopped getting lost on the Citadel. Well, alright, I still get lost on the Citadel, but slightly less often. Anyway, while those small changes did make a difference, there was one major shift that changed my view on the whole game. That was this feeling, or rather, the feeling that this moment, and moments like it, inspired in me. Yeah, I know, an empty planet and a pretty skybox. Big deal, right? Well, it wasn't just the environments that felt huge. It wasn't just looking up at an alien moon that made me feel tiny. The gameplay systems, narrative, and other small details all supported that feeling. First of all, I think it's important that the optional worlds of Mass Effect are empty. They don't feel like levels. There aren't chest-high walls or roads or set pieces. It's just you, your squad, and a vehicle that doesn't control as badly as everyone says once you get used to it. It's still pretty bad though. Arguably, there's nothing fun about any of this. There's no real dialogue on these planets that makes your squad dynamics interesting. There aren't many, if any, enemies, and the occasional anomaly or quest item are typically little more than a pyramid or the writings of Matriarch Dilanaga. Even if there's only one really exciting discovery to be had, for the fact that it is a discovery, not an objective on a minimap, that possibility of discovery still feels ever present, even if it's not. In my first playthrough of Mass Effect, I never encountered the space cows, and when I came across them in my second, it was genuinely exciting. They served absolutely no purpose. You couldn't talk to them or interact with them in a meaningful way, but that was precisely what made them so exciting. BioWare had no reason to add them. They didn't add much to the game and probably involved a fair amount of effort to model and animate, after which they're placed in areas that aren't marked and are entirely optional. Because there's no reason to expect that they'd be there, it feels like a discovery, the sort of discovery that Mass Effect's planetary exploration promised, and the sort of discovery that the sequels entirely removed. Discovery for discovery's sake. Discovery that doesn't drive the plot or provide a new gameplay opportunity. Discovery that purely adds to the world of the game instead of the particular story that Shepard finds herself at the center of. Ultimately, this sort of optional content builds the world of the series and establishes it as one that exists outside of the context of Shepard and outside of the narrative of the Reapers. Something that the sequels never quite achieved in my eyes. More than just being empty though, the worlds feel untouched. Not so much in that they have no traces of a habitation, but rather because those small traces of a habitation so clearly haven't been successful. I love that you find small stories of individual struggles to live on an alien planet, and that, more often than not, these attempts have totally failed. You can see small temporary housings with faint paths leading from them, but the path quickly disappears and the former inhabitants of this setup are invariably dead, missing, or a criminal of some kind living in hiding. No one wants to live there, and the planets you might want to live on have already been colonized. This means that, although the worlds vary a little in content and landscape, they all share a similar feeling. This world wasn't built for you. There aren't roads that connect points A and B. There's no right way to go or easy way to get there, nor is there much of a reason to get there at all. But you can, and that's wonderful. That leads me to one of the failings of the game, however. In making the Mako capable of climbing almost any incline, the game does little to encourage you to find the best route, instead of merely heading towards the objective in as straight a line as possible, which is a real shame. If you spend some time trying to find the easiest route, it allows the world to feel a lot more real. Using valleys and plateaus you spotted from the map to make your journey felt like the sort of procedure you would go through on an untouched planet if you really were exploring it. But because the Mako is so forgiving of, shall we say, unorthodox driving, you will never really need to do so. You still can, of course, but there's no real incentive for doing so other than playing the role you're given. And so most players probably won't bother. The optional worlds themselves, though, are far from the only element that contribute to the scale of the first game. One of the other elements is the loot system, which feels extensive and deep, with actual lore and flavor text for the companies that make the various types of armor, weapons, or tools you can find in the game. Now that's great and all, and there are heaps of other examples I could talk about, but the example I really want to talk about involves a very specific type of loot: Quarian armor. Quarian armor is very hard to find. Rarely stocked in any stores and almost never dropped as loot, the rarity of the armor compared to the masses of Turian or Krogan armor you find backs up the size and depth of the universe. The fact that there aren't many Quarians outside of the migrant fleet, and they largely aren't very warlike, was backed up by this comparative rarity. The characters aren't treated equally by the Mass Effect universe, and this is reflected in the gameplay. I love this detail because it feeds back into everything you've been told about the Quarians and the place in their universe, right down to the homemade feel that Tali's armor has in the first game.
Our lives aren't easy. Resources are scarce, and we are constantly on the move. Everything we do must in some way contribute to the continuation of the migrant fleet. There are 17 million Quarians in the flotilla, and each of us relies on the others for survival.
Little of what they have is new, and as a people they've had to reuse and repair what they have. Although this wasn't a detail I noticed the first time I played Mass Effect, and it doesn't directly feed into the feeling that the first Mass Effect inspires in me, I honestly think it's one of the best details in the game. It may not lead to my favourite moment, that's the discussion with Rex on Vermeer, nor does it create any other memorable moment in the game, but it's a perfect example of gameplay systems backing up and contributing to the narrative backdrop that the Mass Effect series builds upon. Mass Effect feels huge. Its universe, its lore, and the individual planets you land on all feel impossibly grand in scope. There was an ambition there that no game I've played since has matched, and for that ambition, it's easy for me to forgive those moments where the game falls short. It all comes down to that feeling, looking up at an alien moon while embroiled in a universe so fleshed out that it has its own fictional encyclopedia. That's what puts Mass Effect above its sequels. Not the encyclopedia, all the games have those, but rather the feeling that made me want to read it. The specific moment when I fell in love with a game remains the only time I've ever had chills playing a video game. And that's one of the reasons I love Mass Effect more than almost any other game, despite its faults. In my experience, the scale of its ambition simply hasn't been matched. That's why I can say with confidence that if Andromeda can capture any of that feeling, I'll absolutely be happy paying full price for it. I'd love to know what you think. Have any games given you chills? What are some of your favourite moments in games? Let me know in the comments below. Cheers, have a good one.